belong within the boundaries of a given firm. One line of thought, begun by Ronald Coase in the 1930s, suggests that under certain conditions, market transactions often are not satisfactory for individuals. When it is difficult or expensive to get information about what you want to buy, when bargains are hard to strike because information is asymmetrical, and when it's costly or challenging to enforce agreements. If any of those conditions apply, it makes sense to keep the activities involved within a firm. Until fairly recently, the boundaries between firms and markets were well understood and relatively fixed. But digital technologies have changed all that by making it possible to use markets for a lot of work that once was done more efficiently within firms. Platforms such as Alibaba and Amazon have made it easy to outsource functions like selecting suppliers, negotiating prices, enforcing contracts, managing payments, and more. As a result, executives in companies that were born digital have assumptions about how transactions should be structured that are completely different from those of executives in legacy companies. What's more, because digital firms' structures are evolving all the time, their managers revisit those assumptions frequently. Direct-to-consumer businesses, think Casper in mattresses, Harry's in shaving, and Warby Parker in eyeglasses, are constantly experimenting with and adjusting features like free shipping, product bundles, bonuses for adding items, and so on. Those tactics simply aren't available to an incumbent selling through distributors. And because the digital businesses cut out intermediaries, they can be profitable at a much lower scale. A key consequence of all this is that digital startups can change direction or pivot without destroying much value. They usually aren't that capital intensive and don't have big payrolls. The founders of Rooted, for instance, initially sold plants out of their apartment directly to consumers, only later moving to a separate space and hiring employees. For such companies, failure is relatively cheap, unless it happens late in the day or investors succumb to the growth at all costs mantra that is unraveling the fortunes of many so-called unicorns. The employees, managers, and shareholders of traditional companies, however, cannot pivot without destroying value. If their digital gambles fail, workers lose their jobs, and physical assets have to be unloaded at fire sale prices. And unlike the venture capitalists who back startups, the investors in what was once a safe company may not have the buffer of high-return investments to offset their losses. But although incumbent firms can't pivot easily, the good news is that they don't need to. Think about what big companies can do that startups can't. Entrepreneurial ventures nearly always exploit a single idea. They usually can't try out multiple versions of the same idea at the same time, let alone multiple ideas. A big firm, in contrast, has the resources to explore a variety of ideas and can more easily experiment with different processes and operations, which makes it more likely to discover a dominant model than a startup is. This also gives a large firm a better chance of responding effectively to a digital challenge. Take the case of the German metals distributor Klöckner. Its CEO, Gisbert Ruhl, wanted to build a digital platform for the entire industry, but he didn't sponsor a big bang effort to create one. Instead, his goal was to build digital competencies gradually, while benefiting from the knowledge and insight of people working in the firm's core steel business. For the first 2 years, Ruhl focused on digitizing inefficient manual processes. The firm created an online shop, a contract portal, order transparency tools, and a parts manager app. Through these efforts, it learned enough to create a platform on which the company and customers could seamlessly interact. Klöckner's story reveals another advantage that incumbent firms have, at least in the early stages of an industry's adoption of digital models. They're led by people who already know their customers and can mine rich databases of prior transactions for insights. Startups are often led by technical experts and tend to be driven by new technical functionality rather than by the full portfolio of what customers are looking for. If you put it